Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another installment of the Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee. We've got two bills today on the agenda. The first is HB 12 from the majority whip. I'm going to kick it over to Patrick to discuss the amendments.
Okay. Do you want me to go through the bill first, or?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, if you can remind everyone what the bill does.
This is House Bill 12, as the chair said, Delegate Jazz Lewis's bill. It starts by stating the intent of the General Assembly that MDOT make all reasonable attempts to include TOD, transit-oriented development, in development plans for areas served by transit by giving preference to plans that include TOD when distributing funds from state programs for development and infrastructure, federal community development block grants, and proceeds of general obligation bonds and grant anticipation revenue, and when awarding tax credits. Requires an annual report from MDOT analyzing each TOD in the state, including demographic, associated, and economic indicators in the TOD and surrounding areas, and development activity in the TOD during the report period, and transit station use rates. And this is the big thing. It establishes the TOD capital grant and revolving loan fund to promote equitable and inclusive TODs. The fund is financed by budget appropriations, money from other government sources, including block grants from the federal government and the Transportation Trust Fund. Ground rent or land sale proceeds received from the sale or lease of a capital asset to a private party under a TOD, principal and interest on fund loans, investment earnings, and any other source. The money that they get from loans or the sale or rent of property must be separately accounted for and may be used only for TODs in the same county in which the real property subject to the ground rent, et cetera, is located. There's a mandated appropriation in the fund that the fund have a balance every year of $10 million. The assumption is that the fund will be fully depleted every year. The fund may be used by MDOT to provide financial assistance to locals for transit-oriented development design plans, public infrastructure improvements, gap funding for public-private development within a TOD. MDOT must establish and publish eligibility requirements and scoring standards for review of applications. They may establish different eligibility requirements and scoring standards for different types of financial assistance, scoring preferences for projects that will enhance access to transit for low-income and minority citizens in areas with affordable housing and diversity of job and educational opportunities, and encourage development around underdeveloped and underused transit stations. Now we'll go to the amendments. The amendments expand the definition of TOD to include a mix of structures that are part of a development plan involving property adjacent to a planned or existing transit corridor. Substitute the Smart Growth Subcabinet for MDOT as the state entity that partners with local jurisdictions to designate TODs. Specifically includes funds from the Complete Streets program as state development and infrastructure for which TOD may apply. Establishes that a TOD designation applies for 10 years, subject to a potential 10-year extension. Substitutes again the Smart Growth Subcabinet for MDOT as the entity responsible for establishing eligibility requirements and scoring standards and preferences for applicants for financial assistance. Requires MDOT in collaboration with the HCD to support award recipients by providing technical assistance for any studies, plans, or code changes. And those are the sponsors' amendments. I think we have to have an additional amendment to cut the annual appropriation or fund level from 10 million to 5 million. That came from leadership/appropriations.
Got it. Thank you very much, Patrick. Do we have any questions about the bill or the amendments? Seeing none, I would also.
I've got a question, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. The sub-cabinet is under which cabinet?
Patrick.
The
Smart Growth Subcabinet is under which?
I could look that up for you.
Okay, that's great. And then you mentioned ground rent. That kind of perked my interest. You're taking money from ground rent and putting it into this fund? Is that what's happening?
No, I think ground rents is probably the wrong word here. What they're saying is that when you're doing a TOD and you're taking state assets and transferring it to a private entity or leasing it out to a private entity,
Leasing, ground
that the
leasing. I
proceeds from
got
that
you.
would go into the fund.
Yes, I
And they
got
could
it.
only be used in the county from which they came.
Yeah, these are land leases. I got it totally. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I would also note that there is some additional amendment language that DHCD is interested in us adding to the bill. We don't have that drafted up, and so we may do like we did with the Food Resiliency Council when Delegate Jacobs offered a committee amendment. We may, if we do pass this bill today in subcommittee, we may attach a DHCD amendment in full committee, which is to say that if anyone has any additional feedback or amendments, we could also consider those in full committee. Yeah, Delegate Foley.
What's DHCD?
The Department of Housing and Community Development.
Okay, thanks.
The state agency, DHCD, yeah. So their legislative liaison is a guy named Hunter Pickles. You guys may have seen his name before on some testimony. He had some concerns about the language in the bill about the community development block grant funding, just because that's a federal program that's controlled by the federal government. And I think that the department is concerned about us messing with that basically anyway. So I think it's a reasonable and I think technical amendment that we can take up later.
Move the amendments, Mr. Chair.
Delegate, just move the amendments. So we have a second. Thank you. All in favor of the amendments, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, no. The amendments pass. Is there any discussion on the bill as amended?
Just want to make sure, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please, Delegate.
If it's possible, I'm not sure it is. If it's possible, could we have the additional amendments that will be offered in the full committee before the full committee, if it's possible, Mr. Chair?
You're saying, can we add those now? I think we just
no. Before you suggested that there were going to be additional amendments being offered into the full committee, perhaps. And I was just wondering, is it possible to get those prior to them being offered in the full committee?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
We'll make sure you guys all see the amendment from DHCD before we actually have our next voting session. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was having problems with my mute button going on and off. Can you say again a little bit about the DHCD concerns specific to CDBG funding? And is that what their amendment, the agency's amendment, will attempt to address?
Correct. There's some language in there that in the bill that affects the CDGB funds. And essentially the department's position is that they don't really have any authority over those funds. They come into the federal government, and then DHCD essentially just passes them over to the local authorities that are responsible for distributing the funds. And so they just want to make sure that we take that out so that we're not running afoul of federal law. But it's a very technical issue. It's not going to affect the bill in any sort of substantive way.
Yeah, no, that is good to hear. And I'm glad someone flagged that as a former county council member, that program, it's an excellent program, but it has shrunk so dramatically over the years. And it is so effective at funding so many, local projects, especially with respect to, housing, but also infrastructure for the lowest income census tracts. It's used for all kinds of good local projects. And it is it's so competitive that program and funds have shrunk so dramatically just over the last decade or so that it creates a huge food fight at the local level with people scrambling to get access to that money. So if this bill had language around that, I'm happy to see it being addressed or eliminated altogether. So thank you for the clarification.
Yep, absolutely. And Patrick, just a technical question: by voting the amendments, we're including in that the appropriations amendment, correct? We don't need to pass a separate amendment for that.
Yes.
Okay,
we
great.
talked about it though.
Okay, great. Any other discussion on the bill? Okay, do we have a motion on the bill?
Motion to move the amendments.
We've moved the amendments. We're now on the bill.
Move the bill as amended. Yeah.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of the bill as amended, signify by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No one is opposed. Bill passes. Okay, great. Thank you all. We're going to move on to our second bill of the day and final bill of the day, and it's HB 561. This is a local bill from Carroll County that gives the town of Mount Airy urban renewal authority to basically be able to use eminent domain projects. This is just the latest in a long series of municipalities that have come to this subcommittee requesting this authority. Last year, I think we gave it to one or two other municipalities. I remember Hancock, and specifically in Western Maryland being one of them. So it's the identical language that we passed for several other municipalities, and there are no amendments.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I might also add that the same bill passed the House 134-0 in 2020.
Right. Yep.
Move the
Thank
bill, move HB 561, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Any last discussion on the bill? Seeing none, all in favor of House Bill 561?
I see a hand raised. Mr.
Oh, I
Chair.
do too.
Oh,
Delegate Kohler.
sorry, I'm sorry. I was slow getting my hand up. Delegate Holmes, you said the bill passed in 2020. What happened to it?
It passed the House 134-0 in the House. After that, I didn't dig any further.
I think I could probably answer that. So it was during the 2020 session. It passed fairly close to crossover, and then the session ended shortly thereafter. So I think it just was one of those things that wasn't really addressed.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Thanks.
COVID casualty, but we've generally passed this kind of bill essentially every session for one town or another. Okay. All in favor of the bill, please signify by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, no one's opposed. House Bill 5, and Delegate Rocky, I think, is stepped out, so not that we record the votes, but I don't think he voted. But House Bill 561 passes as well. That concludes our agenda. Good work, everyone. Out.